Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the NT podcast. My name is Nemanja Jurisic, and today we are diving into one of the most interesting and often underexplored parts of contemporary philosophy of religion, the second stage of the Kalam cosmological argument. Much of the debate around the Kalam focuses on whether the universe began to exist and whether whatever begins to exist must have a cause. But once those questions are on the table, a deeper and arguably more philosophical demanding issue arises. What kind of cause could bring the universe into existence? To help us think carefully about these questions, I'm joined today by Dr. Erik Wielenberg, professor of philosophy at Temporal University. Dr. Wielenberg is well known for his work in ethics and philosophy of religion, and he is the author of the paper Craig's God Cannot Create a Temporal Universe, where he offers a direct and rigorous critique of William Lane Craig's account of the first cause in the Kalam argument. So, Professor Erik, welcome.
Thank you very much. It is great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much for joining me on the Anti podcast. And before we start, could you tell us something more about yourself and your background?
Sure. So briefly, I grew up in Wisconsin, went to college there, went out to the University of Massachusetts for grad school, and then back to the Midwest, where I teach at DePaul University, which is a small liberal arts college in central Indiana. And I think you mentioned some of my work, and I focus primarily in ethics and the philosophy of religion, and especially the intersection of those two areas.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So let's proceed directly into our topic. So, Professor Erik, if there is a cause of the universe, what can we know about it? Is there anything that we can see from the conceptual analysis, some striking characteristics or attributes, anything?
So my own view is if we accept the two sort of main premises of Craig's Kalam cosmological argument, the way he formulates it, I think that leaves a lot of possibilities open as to what the cause of the beginning of the universe could be. And in my mind, it's very unknown. It's very mysterious, and I think it's hard to know much about the nature of that cause. And by taking that position, obviously that puts me in opposition or disagreement with Craig. He thinks that once if the first two premises of that argument are true, then we can use further reasoning to reach the conclusion that the cause of the beginning of the universe must be a godlike entity. And in particular, he makes the case that it would have to be some sort of agent, like a person with free will, that brings the universe into existence through an act of free will. And I sort of have two prongs of attack against that idea, I guess I would say. So one is in the paper that you mentioned, where I'm trying to make the case that I think the way Craig conceives of God, he thinks God is, in particular, has this timeless phase of his existence. And in that timeless phase, we can't say during, but in his timeless state, God timelessly wills or intends to create the universe or a universe. And I think that leads to the implication that the universe itself would have to be timeless, which clearly conflicts with Craig's view and I guess what seems to be the case as well. Now I actually have another paper which is forthcoming in Faith and Philosophy, so one prong is trying to make the case that Craig's own theistic theory is implausible, and then in this other paper, I try to offer an alternative atheistic theory of the beginning of the universe. And what I'm up to there is really trying to make the case that this other atheistic theory is actually compatible with Craig's own principles that he puts forward in advancing the argument. So I've kind of got these two related lines of attack, I guess you would say. And I'm happy to try to elaborate a bit more on either or both of those.
Can we hear what is the alternative to Craig's view? Because if you can have a cause that is also timeless, maybe spaceless, I don't know what other attributes, so that doesn't need to be God. So let's hear it.
Yeah, okay. So to set it up, there's a bit of setting up that needs to be done, and it actually it does actually relate to what we could think of as the first stage of the cosmological argument, the way Craig presents it, and in particular, what is often called the causal principle, which Craig typically states as whatever begins to exist must have a cause for its beginning to exist. And I make the case that if you look carefully at what Craig says and the way he argues for this causal principle, that actually, really, the way to state the causal principle is whatever begins to exist ex nihilo from nothing must have a cause. This might, okay, so what? What is the significance of this? So I think let's make a distinction. Sometimes things begin to exist, but they come from other things. So a simple example would be the butterfly comes into existence, not ex nihilo, but from the caterpillar through a particular process. So sometimes things begin to exist from something else. Um, and then, of course, the opposite of that, or the alternative case, is they come into being ex nihilo from nothing. Um, and I think there are two sort of important points in thinking about this causal principle. One is, again, I think the version of the principle that Craig really argues for is anything that comes into existence from nothing must have a cause for coming into existence or beginning to exist. When he's arguing for the what he calls the causal principle, he often emphasizes the absurdity of things just popping into existence for no reason or uncaused out of nothing, which is the ex nihilo version. And I think even more importantly, in defending the argument, he often gets drawn into discussions of quantum physics. Some people have argued that quantum physics offers counterexamples to the causal principle. And what Craig ends up saying there is he allows that quantum particles could begin to exist uncaused, but that's okay because they come from something else, a quantum vacuum state or something like that. Okay. So if we put this all together, this is where this is headed. It looks like Craig actually accepts the principle that things can begin to exist uncaused as long as they come from something else. It's only the ex nihilo case with no cause that he rules out. And with that in place, I suggest what I call the cosmic bomb hypothesis, which is basically this. Um, as an alternative to Craig's theory of a timeless personal being, which about 13.7 billion years ago, through an act of free will, brings the universe into existence. Another possibility is we have some sort of impersonal entity existing timelessly, and about 13.7 billion years ago, uncaused, this entity becomes temporal and causes the universe to begin. Or basically, another way you might think of it, it turns into the universe. Now, this might seem weird, and a natural, I think, thought is like, doesn't Craig's principles rule this out, happening with no cause? But the answer is actually no, because it is only things beginning to exist ex nihilo that he really argues against, or actually can accept, given what he says about quantum physics. And so this, I call it a cosmic bomb because the idea is as a metaphor, you imagine a sort of timeless bomb which suddenly goes off for no particular reason and becomes temporal, and that is the beginning of the universe. And so the idea is, as far as I can see, none of Craig's principles rule out this possibility.
Oh, this is so interesting. So, what do you mean by impersonal cause? Like Brahman, Tao, or do you mean something else? Like some force, natural? I don't know.
Who knows? There are a lot of possibilities. I think one thing I'm trying to emphasize is once we recognize that there can be timeless entities, who the possibilities are endless. Who knows what like powers, features, capabilities they might have? I mean, it could be something along the lines of what you were describing. But all we really need is a thing, a concrete particular thing existing in a timeless state, which then turns into a temporal object. And you can think of sort of, again, I think the bomb is a helpful metaphor. When Craig is describing his theistic version, he uses a metaphor, um, which he got from a medieval thinker, of a man timelessly sitting who suddenly decides to stand up or stands up, right? And this is a metaphor, sort of helpful image. Um, so this is why I like the cosmic bomb as a sort of image. It creates the sense of this thing changes, becomes temporal for no particular reason. Um, and again, Craig cannot consistently rule this out because he allows that quantum particles can begin to exist with no cause as long as they come from something else. And so on this cosmic bomb hypothesis, the temporal universe begins to exist uncaused, but that's okay because it's not coming ex nihilo, it's coming from this other thing. What can I say about the nature of this timeless impersonal thing? Not much, other than that it turns into um, or becomes temporal at a certain point, and that's how the universe begins. How's this grabbing you?
Okay, very interesting. So, do we have another alternatives? Like I heard from Joe Schmidt and others, like some singularity, quantum field, or universal wave function, non-zero dimensional dot, or anything.
hmm
So, are there other options beside that one that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I think some of the those theories that you just mentioned, um, can be understood as particular versions of what I'm calling the cosmic bomb hypothesis. So, Vilenkin, for example, the physicist, has a theory of like a zero-dimensional and I think timeless object, which spontaneously like tunnels or something like that, and that's how the universe begins. And so, if you're wanting a less vague version of the cosmic bomb hypothesis, I do think it's possible to flesh it out by basically understanding some of these theories from physics as more specific versions of this cosmic bomb hypothesis. And again, what the key ingredient in all these theories is, so like Vilenkin's, zero-dimensional entity, it's timeless and it becomes temporal without a cause, spontaneously, you might say. And again, the thing I'm trying to emphasize is none of Craig's arguments rule out this possibility. Um, it's only beginning to exist ex nihilo that he actually argues must have a cause. And so this other scenario of a timeless thing, like a zero-dimensional entity, spontaneously becoming temporal, as far as I can see, at least so far, he has not presented arguments that would rule out this possibility.
Okay, very good. So let me recall one analogy. Man that is sitting and wants to stand up. Doesn't that agree more with temporal God? Because if you imagine Ryan Mullen's model of God in neoclassical theism, then it seems that times is flowing and he just decided to stand up. It's not a good analogy with timeless God. So do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I think I'm sympathetic to that line of argument as well. And I guess maybe to sort of add to that a bit, the way Craig describes it, in his scenario, God in his timeless phase timelessly wills or intends to create the universe. And I think there's a puzzle there in figuring out how a being like that could cause a temporal universe. So to sort of flesh that out a bit, I mean, Craig himself argues that if you have a timeless cause that is sufficient for the effect, then the effect must be timeless as well. Um, and when you combine that with his view that God timelessly intends to create, it's hard to see how he could avoid the implication that if God is timelessly willing to create, what's the holdup? What, why is the universe not present? It seems like God's timeless intention to create is going to be causally sufficient for the universe to exist, but then by Craig's own principles, the universe would have to be timeless as well. So to take it back to the analogy or the metaphor of the person sitting, so we really what we have to imagine is a timeless person sitting, but also timelessly willing to stand up. And now there's a mystery as to why he's not standing already, I guess you would say, right?
Yes, that makes sense, honestly. But I was reading his book a few days ago, and he says that he gives room for idea that maybe God is outside of metric time, not necessarily timeless. It could be temporal, but exist in some topological time, or I don't know, Swinburne's version or Mullins. So he gives room for that idea, but in lectures he says it must be timeless. So I cannot connect those two. So do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, he does. Sometimes he'll make a distinction between physical and metaphysical time. Is this related to what you're asking about? Um, and so sometimes he'll sort of describe God in metaphysical time, putting things in order, and then somehow counting down like three, two, one, let there be light, or something like that. Um, I guess, frankly, I have a hard time making sense of that. I mean, even if you somehow have this ordering happening, it still seems it's happening. If we think of physical time, it's happening in a timeless state. And so I guess I'm there. I think my view is I'm not quite sure how to make sense of that. And so again, I just sort of come back to if in the physical sense of time, he's timelessly willing the universe to begin. Again, why is the universe then not present in a timeless fashion? And just to add to that a bit, and there's one writing where Craig actually says he's addressing some other objection, and he says there can't be a lapse between like a divine intention and the effect of that intention, which again makes it more inexplicable as to like if God is timelessly willing to create or the seated man is timelessly willing to stand up, why is the universe not sort of already there? Why is the guy not already, as you might say, standing up?
Yes, good question. I honestly think that maybe Thomas Ord has a better point because he wants to say that God, if he exists, then he creates from eternally universes. So maybe that's better idea than timeless God creating temporal. I don't know. That's confusing. So yeah.
Yeah, it's the puzzle of how to get a temporal effect from a timeless cause. And again, what's interesting is, I mean, Craig himself suggests that this is sort of puzzling. And again, he thinks that free will, if the cause has free will, that's going to somehow allow this to occur. And this is part of his argument as to why the cause of the universe would have to be a personal being with free will, sort of the only way it could work. And I guess my thought is when you look at this more carefully, it's hard to see how even that could work. And again, I think the key is there's this particular thing that Craig insists on, which is it's not like God is timelessly there without an intention to create and then decides to create. That would be different, if you see what I mean. It's important for Craig that the intention to create is timeless. It's you can't say it's there the whole time, but it's not as if God is sort of hanging out timelessly and then suddenly decides to create. He's intending to create already in his timeless state. And I think that's the thing that really leads to the trouble.
All right, Professor Eric. So what about other attributes like spaceless and immaterial? Should the cause of the universe be spaceless, really? Or should it be only outside of that space? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a case where I think sort of who knows what the possibilities are. Um, I guess in contemporary physics, there's the idea of space and time being linked. There's the concept of space-time. So I suppose if you think it's got to be timeless, it would also have to be spaceless if you think space and time are linked in this way. So that might be a reason for thinking it has to be spaceless. Uh, does it have to be immaterial? I mean, if it's a physical thing, it's clearly not gonna be like the physical things that we're familiar with because they all exist in time, and so they're always in a state of change. But I guess myself, I don't see like back to this cosmic bomb hypothesis. I'm not sure why it couldn't be something that we would think of as physical, but just changeless if it's existing in a timeless state. Not until, but when the universe is not there, our physical universe, it's existing in a timeless state. I don't see why there couldn't be some sort of physical entity like that.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. So, what do you think about attribute to necessary existence? Maybe if we consider this is uncaused cause or first, so it should be different than all contingent things. So, does that make sense to you?
I'm not sure it would have to be necessary if we think of, or at least the way I like to think of it is given Craig's principles. What are the options within his own principles? It would have to, by his principles, it would have to be timeless. And again, this goes back to the causal principle, which again I think properly interpreted is nothing can begin to exist ex nihilo without a cause. And so timeless entities do not begin to exist. And so, on Craig's view, they do not need causes, right? And so that's why, on his view, God has to have this timeless phase. If God was entirely temporal, then God would come into existence ex nihilo and would need a cause. And so, if you this physical thing like this, perhaps this cosmic bomb or Vilenkin's zero-dimensional entity that he describes, they would have to have a timeless phase of their existence. But I don't see why they would have to exist necessarily. It could be just a contingent feature of reality that this thing is timelessly there and spontaneously explodes or enters time, and that's how the universe begins.
Yes, and what if we define differently causal principle? If we say that whatever begins to exist or whatever has a previous state has a
Hmm.
cause,
Yeah.
so we don't need to say like Craig or anyone else ex nihilo or something like that.
Mhm.
So it could be material cause, it could be something else. Nobody cares. So what if we redefine? What do you think?
Yeah, so if we have like a stronger version, so now we're saying anything that begins to exist, whether from nothing or from something else, that like transformation or beginning to exist needs to have a cause, like
Yes,
a
exactly.
strong, yeah.
So is that a better way to define?
Um, I think the problem with that principle, once you spell it out in a strong way, that does seem to be challenged by some of the stuff from quantum physics, where it seems like you do have, at least on plausible interpretations to some of these theories, you have entities, quantum particles coming into existence spontaneously without a particular cause. It's just that they're coming from something else. And so that principle, at least plausibly, is just empirically false, right? And so that, if science conflicts with it, that's a reason, it's hard to sort of take it seriously as a philosophical principle you're going to use in an argument, right?
Mm. Yes, okay, thank you so much. Now, what about supernatural? Should it be the cause of the universe, something that science doesn't observe and can't observe? So it's something beyond material. You already covered immaterial, but what do you mean if maybe it's supernatural?
Yeah, so these terms, natural, supernatural, non-natural, they get thrown around a lot. I think they can mean different things. Um, so if supernatural here just means can't be studied by our science, empirical science, then it seems plausible that if there's a timeless entity that turns into or somehow causes the universe to begin, that is going to be beyond the reach of our science simply because our science can't reach past the beginning of the universe, right? And so it would be supernatural in that sense. I don't think it would have to be supernatural I mean, sometimes supernatural suggests divine, right? I don't think it would have to be supernatural in the sense of divinity or an agent or a spirit or anything like that. But certainly supernatural in like science can't get to it. There's a sort of blindness of science, and this is I think a source of frustration for cosmologists. I forget exactly. It's not even. It's like a one. They can't get. They can trace the beginning of the universe back to like one Planck length. There's a particular super short amount of time, but it's just impossible empirically to sort of get past that. And so, if there is some sort of timeless entity, yeah, it's not going to be the sort of thing that could be studied by our science. But that just seems to be because of how time works, right?
Mhm. Yes. So now, what do you think about Graham Oppy's view? He wants to say that if there is some cause of the universe, maybe singularity, then yeah, if that's even eternal in the past, it doesn't mean that it will be eternal in the future. So maybe it stopped existing after the creating universe. So what do you think? Does it follow?
So let me just make sure I understand. So the hypothesis is we have some sort of entity, not necessarily God, exists timelessly, creates the universe, time begins, and then at some point, this thing that created the universe ceases to exist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so for this reason, it wouldn't necessarily have to be God. Is that the
Yes.
idea? Yeah. It's interesting. I think, I guess my thought or question is how significant that objection really is. And I guess what I'm thinking is if Craig is right about a lot of what he says about the nature of the first cause, that at least it would have to be like a person, um, that would still be a pretty significant conclusion, right? I mean, if it's like, well, the person might not be around still, it's still pretty wild and impressive if you can show that an agent through free will must have created the universe. And to me, it's one of those arguments that like it's sort of technically correct, but it if that's the best we can do, Craig's argument gets us almost to God. If you see what I mean. Um, and so I mean I think it's an interesting point. I'm just not sure how I'd be looking for a stronger challenge, I guess is the way to put it. If that does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps.
Like,
Thank you.
yeah, if
Mhm.
we can show that some person must have caused the universe, that's quite significant. I want to try to stop the argument before it gets that far.
Yeah, but yeah, we cannot accept all the attributes from Craig, but just let's try to think. Is this good objection? So let's
Yep.
proceed next. What about idea that Craig doesn't say that it should be one. He's open to maybe polytheism is also
Mhm.
explanation for Kalam. We need other arguments to establish whether this is one
Mhm.
God. But if we consider Kalam argument, do you think if we accept parsimony principle or when we consider unity of the universe, its harmony and other things, maybe it
Mhm.
should be one cause? Or what do you think?
Yeah, so one God versus many gods. Yeah, that's sort of interesting. I haven't thought about that particular angle. So I'll just, off the top of my head here. Um, an issue that Hume actually, as you may know, gets into quite a bit in the dialogues concerning natural religion when he's examining like design type arguments. And he at one point says, well, maybe it could either be a committee of gods working together to create the universe. That's one of so like a polytheistic scenario. Um, and I suspect that, I mean, obviously Craig, thinks he has arguments that could suggest it's one God. And so you suggested like an Occam's razor type argument. There is this again. I'm looking to Hume here. There is this interesting discussion Hume has where he says if you look at the mixture of good and evil in the world, that actually points to this sort of Manichaean hypothesis where maybe you have two gods, one good, one evil, and the good one is trying to make the world good, and the other one's trying to make the world evil, but they're equally powerful, and so that's why you get this mixture of good and evil in the world. Um, so I think that's an interesting sort of possibility to consider. But Hume also argues, and maybe this is what Craig would say, I don't know, but there is this a kind of harmony, and like the laws of nature are consistent, and so perhaps that suggests like a single creator rather than two creators sort of battling it out, as in this Manichaean hypothesis. Um, but yeah, the Occam's razor, I guess one being simpler. I suppose that has some force. And again, my strategy is like to not to try to block the argument before it gets to we've got personal beings involved in creating the
Yes.
universe.
Okay, we'll talk about arguments for personhood, but I wonder just other attributes. Here is another thought. In order for the cause to produce the first event in the causal chain, it would have to be extremely powerful to produce our universe. So, would you
Mhm.
agree with that? I asked this Luke Barnes, and he says this cause not only needs to have quantitative power, it should also have a qualitatively different kind of power because it produces the whole reality physical. So, what do you think?
Yeah, that seems right. If again, if we are granting for the sake of argument some sort of person, that is going to be a remarkable kind of power, and especially as if again, for the sake of argument, Craig claims it's going to have to be creating the physical universe from nothing, ex nihilo. That is a very unique sort of power. So that makes sense. If we've got a person, it does seem like it's going to have to be a super powerful kind of person, right?
Yes, but if we don't grant those things, like he needs to be a person,
Mhm.
uh, if we consider only cause of the universe, do you think it need to be powerful or no?
Yeah. So if we go back to this cosmic bomb hypothesis, um, again, there we wouldn't it wouldn't be creation ex nihilo because there's something there which enters time and causes the universe to begin. And so there, I think, I mean, clearly it's got the power to become temporal, but it wouldn't have, it wouldn't need to have this amazing power of creating ex nihilo. It would just need the power to become temporal, which is clearly it is powerful in some sense, but it's a far cry from this sort of, omnipotence or miraculous conjuring up of something out of nothing, right?
Thank you, Dr. Eric. What about highly intelligent and good? Because if we consider our universe, it's really beautiful on two levels. Like on a superficial level, a large portion of the universe simply look beautiful, and on a deeper level, the laws of nature that physicists discover are elegant and beautiful. So maybe the cause of the universe needs to be intelligent and good. What do you think?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think this is shifting into more of a sort of argument from design. Um, I don't have a, I mean, I think these are interesting arguments worth considering. I don't have a ton to say about them off the top of my head. But clearly, yeah, there's a lot to be said about trying to explain why the laws of nature are the way that they are. There's, as you mentioned, there's a sort of elegance. There's also this mathematical argument that I think Craig has been pushing lately, where starting with this idea of like it's a striking fact that the laws of physics can be described in these simple mathematical formulas, so that human math seems to correspond to reality in this deep way. And there's this argument of like, roughly that's unlikely to be a coincidence. It points to some kind of designer. The argument from beauty, if we leave aside the math stuff and just like we do find our world to be beautiful, at least sometimes. There, I actually think there is a plausible evolutionary story to be told. I'm looking out the window right now, beautiful blue sky, and I think a lot of people love this shade of blue. Um, Imagine if you were, a hypothetical human that gets up and sees the blue sky and is just like, it's hideous. I can't stand that color. It's horrifying. And they just find all of nature to be very unattractive and disturbing. That's going to be, over a lifetime, that's going to be a disadvantage to surviving and reproducing, if you see what I mean. So it would make sense that we're descended from, our ancestors were people who found the natural world to be beautiful because that would have helped motivate them and made them more likely to survive and reproduce. So basically, we think the blue sky is beautiful because we're descended from beings who thought the blue sky was beautiful. And related to that, of course, we don't like a gray sky, and this too would make sense if you think back to humans living as nomadic in a nomadic lifestyle in small tribes and so on. When it's gray and the weather is bad, that's a good time to lay low and hang out by the fire. When the sun is out and the sky is blue, that's the time to be active. And so it would make sense that psychologically we're inspired, we're motivated by a beautiful blue sky. We don't like the gray sky as much. And so our sense of what's beautiful and not in nature, in that respect, I think could be explained in an evolutionary way. It wouldn't require a divine creator. The math argument is different. And yeah, I don't have a lot to say about that one at this point. Craig has a lot of arguments, and you got to sort of take them one at a time.
Yes, okay. So another attribute Andrew Loke point out that maybe if we accept causal principle and that there is no infinite regress, then the first cause needs to be initially changeless. So what do you think? Is it reasonable?
If I'm understanding it correctly, that seems plausible. I think changelessness and timelessness would be linked. Um, and so the again the cosmic bomb scenario that I've described, this timeless entity that at some point enters time without a cause or becomes temporal without a cause, would be a better way of saying it. Uh, it would be changeless. Um, if time is passing, there's going to be change, and so I think changelessness would imply timelessness. So it does seem plausible to me that if we accept the main stage of the Kalam cosmological argument, it does point towards some sort of timeless entity. The idea I want to resist is that it has to be a timeless person. I think there are other timeless entities that aren't ruled out by Craig's principles.
Right, but would you agree that it could be also temporal because maybe there is a first moment and before that there is no changing, and from one moment there is a series of changes and in states, in events, and I don't know. So maybe it doesn't need to be timeless. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if you go that route, um, then at least you would need some sort of argument against, if I'm understanding it correctly, you would need to reject the the causal principle. If I'm understanding this correctly, because that's the one that says anything that begins to exist from nothing has to have a cause. And if I'm understanding it correctly, the scenario you're describing, there would be something like at the first moment of time that's just there and hasn't come from something else. So it would seem like it's coming from nothing. Again, if I'm understanding this correctly. Is this tell me if I'm tracking what you're saying.
Uh, I never thought on this, so this is new for me. But maybe there is a problem. I don't know. So
Okay.
yeah, imagine we have a God. So he's just in one single moment, uh,
Yeah.
and before that he didn't do anything, no changes. So does that can we apply causal principle there? I don't know.
So I, I'm gonna use the word before, even though that might not be quite right, but just to try to it's difficult to talk about this, but so before the first moment of time, there's a changeless. being, and then change starts like at the first moment of time, and then time is ticking after that. Is that
Yeah,
the
that's
idea?
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I mean that again, if I'm understanding it correctly, that does sound like Craig's idea, except we can't, on Craig's view, we can't say that the timeless God exists before the first moment of time because there can be no temporal relationships between the timeless entity and anything in time.
Yeah, then we
So
say it's sans creation or prior to universe.
yeah, 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 and so that I mean that seems like basically Craig's view. And again, I think the problem there is you got to remember Craig also says that this changeless God in its changeless state is willing to create a universe. So again, why the holdup? How can there be a changeless state with the intention to create, but without the universe there?
Yes, good question. So let me read a quote from Andrew Loke. He wants to say, in order to cause an event, Big Bang or whatever, from an initial changeless state, the first cause must have first the capacity to be the originator of the event in a way that is undetermined by any prior event, since the first cause is the first. And second, the capacity to prevent itself from changing, for otherwise, the first cause would not have been initially changeless and existing beginninglessly without the event or change. So does this imply that first cause has a libertarian freedom?
So the second principle that you mentioned there, it needs to have the power to prevent itself. I've looked at some of what Loke has to say about this, and I think one problem with the way he describes it is some of his arguments seem to imply that the timeless, changeless entity, that like time is passing while it's in this changeless state. And in fact, I mean, this talk of like preventing yourself, it's hard to see how to understand that in a sort of timeless fashion. You get the sense of like the being is there and it's holding back. It's waiting to either create or become temporal or something like that. But that, I mean, that just can't be the right way to think of it because no time is passing. And the sense of like stopping yourself from doing something or holding back, I guess for me, it's hard to see how to understand that outside of a temporal context.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Eric. Now, let's cover those three arguments that cause need to be personal from Dr. Craig. So he wants to say the only things that he can imagine is like abstract objects, like numbers, and personal being like mind or something like that. So, is there
Hmm.
any third option?
Yes, the cosmic bomb, a timeless, concrete particular that spontaneously becomes temporal. And so the options he mentions, I think to me it's a classic case of a false dichotomy. There's another possibility that is just left out, and I don't think his principles provide any reason to rule out that other possibility. And again, as we were saying earlier, some of these theories, like Vilenkin's theory, Vilenkin is positing some sort of concrete entity, not an abstract object, this like zero-dimensional thing existing timelessly. So that seems imaginable. If Craig can't imagine it, maybe that's a weakness of his imagination rather than rather than an argument, right? So I do think, I mean, that's helpful, right? This sort of like, well, it's got to be one of these options. I just think there are other options that Craig so far hasn't provided good arguments against.
Amazing. So, second argument, he wants to say that we have only scientific or personal explanations, like Richard
Mm.
Swinburne wants to say. But here, if we have a universe that is created, then we cannot have a scientific explanation. So it must be personal. What do you think on this?
Yeah, no, so, and I guess with scientific, I assume he's thinking of there's some law of nature that says when these conditions obtain, this effect will be produced. So there again, I think it's a false dichotomy. And quantum physics itself suggests this other scenario where quantum particles spontaneously uncaused come into existence, but they're coming from something else. So we could look at it two ways. Is that phenomenon scientific? If so, then I think the beginning of the universe could be understood in a similar way. So it could be a scientific explanation. On the other hand, if we want to understand scientific explanations as including causation, then I would say there's another possibility, which I would, again would describe as you have a concrete, particular, timeless entity that spontaneously becomes temporal, and that is how the universe begins. And that seems to be another option aside from the two that Craig mentions.
Mhm. Okay, thank you so much. So,
Yeah.
yeah, last reason that Dr. Craig wants to give that this card needs to be personal. He wants to say that in order to timeless cause produce temporal effect, it needs to be personal. Am I correct when
Mhm.
I say this?
Yeah, and I think the key is it's got to be personal because it has to have libertarian free will is the
Yes.
only way. And just to add to that a bit, in fact, when Craig explains this more fully, he appeals specifically to agent causation, which is a particular, in philosophy, a particular model of libertarian free will, where the idea is you have an event, but the cause of the event is not a preceding event, but it's just the agent themselves. And so, actually, Craig's model of the origin of the universe is the event that gets everything started is actually one of these agent causal events where God is going to basically agent cause some physical thing to come into existence ex nihilo, and that's what kicks everything off. And again, yeah, one of his arguments is like this is the only way, only feasible explanation if we have a universe with a beginning. Uh, yeah, and so I mean, again, this sort of goes back to my two main arguments I was describing earlier in the interview. One is, I think when you look fully at Craig's full theory, in particular, remembering that the timeless God, he says, timelessly wills or intends to create the universe. Um, Again, why is the universe not there timelessly? And then this cosmic bomb hypothesis is a scenario where it's not libertarian free will that gets things started. It's an uncaused event, which again, Craig cannot rule out as long as it's an uncaused beginning, which Craig cannot rule out as long as the thing that begins to exist comes from something else. So if the temporal universe, in some sense, comes from this timeless concrete entity, the cosmic bomb, as I call it, Craig's principles do not rule out that possibility. And so that's another. You can see a lot of the arguments here. I'm making the case that Craig has some false dichotomies happening. It's got to either be this or that, and basically I think there's a third way that he can't really rule out.
All right, thank you, Dr. Eric. Now, here is an argument from my friend that he tries to show that maybe the cause needs to be personal. So he goes like this: ever since Aristotle, various thinkers have noticed a trichotomy that there are three ways in which things in the world can operate: by necessity, by randomness, and by free will. If the first cause operated by necessity, we would expect some regularity in its functioning. However, the picture we get if we accept the existence of a first cause is that it causes nothing and then suddenly causes something. On the other hand, if the first cause operated by randomness, we would expect random things everywhere. Here we have only one apparently random thing and it produces an ordered cosmos that operates according to the physical laws. This leaves the third option as the most plausible explanation, a free willed being that decided to begin causing things. So, what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the cosmic bomb hypothesis, I think, would be a version of randomness. Um, and I think so there the argument against that was if the universe began with a spontaneous, uncaused, in that sense, random event, which again is the thing I'm suggesting as a possibility, a timeless entity, uncaused spontaneously becomes temporal, then we would find randomness everywhere. Um, but we do find that kind of randomness at the basic level of reality, according to quantum physics, right? So I guess off the top of my head, one thought is that actually supports the idea, right? This is the model, right? It's looking at what happens with quantum particles that points toward this cosmic bomb hypothesis as a possibility. And so, I mean, the randomness is, I guess, limited usually to the micro level, to very small things. But it is sort of interesting. I mean, I'm inclined to try to turn that argument around. We do find at the most fundamental level of reality, we do find this very type of randomness, which maybe weakly at least supports the idea that the universe began in such a way.
Okay, very good. Thank you again. And let me ask this question, if you don't mind. If you were a theist, imagine that. How would you improve this argument? Is there something that you could say to Dr. Craig and some correction on this argument? Maybe to make abductive argument rather than deductive. Maybe it's too strong. Maybe to make some modest definitions or
Hmm.
premises. So anything to improve. What do you think?
Well, this is awkward. You want me to give tips for the theist and like Craig?
Yeah, like give
Okay.
us some cheats.
How to make it better? Um, so I mean, this is connected to, I guess, the objection one of the objections I've been pushing would be, is there a way, what can be said against what, again, this like cosmic bomb hypothesis? Uh, and yeah, I mean, in general, I suppose deductive arguments are more ambitious than abductive ones. And especially if we're thinking of this argument does seem to be trying to figure out what would explain the universe, or the beginning of the universe. And so it's natural there to think that maybe a more modest abductive argument is the way to go. Um, so that's certainly worth considering. So, like for example, one strategy Craig or a theist might take is to allow, if they possibly, if they say, okay, so this cosmic bomb thing that Wielenberg has cooked up is like logically possible, but for some reason the theistic hypothesis is just going to be a better explanation. And now we've got like an abductive argument. So that might be worth considering. I will just say, I think Craig, psychologically, he really likes the deductive. He wants to just destroy. He wants decisiveness, right? And that is attractive, I think, when you're trying to convince people. And this sort of goes back to what I think his mission is. He's really trying to convert people, and so the power of like a decisive deductive argument, that's tempting. But I do suppose if you acknowledge these other logical possibilities, then a natural move is to say, okay, sure, we can't like show that that's impossible for sure, but it's going to be less plausible than the theistic hypothesis.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much to Derek. And I think he gave on one lecture abductive case, but he doesn't use it very often. I think he says like the first premise, we have good evidence that the universe began to exist. And
Mm.
second, what is the best explanation of that fact? So the comparative likelihoods of the evidence on theism versus the evidence on non-theism powerfully
Mm.
confirms theism. So would you say it's maybe a better version or?
That's interesting. I actually haven't seen that one. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly worth considering. And so I guess both. It kind of sounds like, so there he's sort of backing away from. I mean, typically when he defends the idea of the universe having a beginning, there's the scientific evidence, but he also thinks he's got these decisive philosophical proofs that there must be a beginning, right? So this it seems like he's offering a more modest argument, which would be worth considering. I guess for myself, this is actually one reason I think again the sort of two prongs I've got. One is like, hey, can you rule out this cosmic bomb thing? But then the other argument is actually that the theistic hypothesis has serious problems, and so if I'm right about the theistic hypothesis not really working, that would create problem for this, even the abductive version, right? If the theistic hypothesis is deeply implausible or even impossible, then it's off the table completely, right? So you would have to deal with that, I think, as well. I'm just curious, do you know where this that version you just mentioned can be found? I don't think I've come
I
across
didn't
that.
find it on your literature. I found it on a
Uh,
lecture in a Plantinga's
hmm.
conference. I don't know what was that. So
Okay,
that's only one lecture. I never found
interesting.
that again. Yeah.
Okay,
But
so it
if
was
he,
it's like in a video as opposed to a
yeah, it's a
paper.
video, and
Okay,
later he
gotcha.
says like, okay, this is abductive, but this is better. This is deductive. So yeah, he goes back
Okay,
to his idea.
yeah. All right, that's interesting. I'll try to take a look at that. But yeah.
All right. Okay. So I just wonder about first stage because we didn't cover that. What do you think on that? Do you think that it is plausible or most probable that universe has a beginning, or that infinite fragments is impossible or improbable? So what do you think on those things?
Yeah, so quickly, and this is where I haven't worked as much on that. But I think for what it's worth, I don't find Craig's philosophical arguments against the impossibility of an infinite regress, temporally infinite, to be convincing.
Yeah,
But
he says like actual
yeah,
infinities, right?
yeah, and there's a lot of debate about that. I don't have anything new to say. I just think there have been like Wes Morriston and another philosopher whose name I should remember but don't have I think have made some good um, arguments against what Craig has to say there. Uh, but it does seem empirically, as from what I can tell, the science does seem to point toward a beginning of the universe. So I think I would not want to rest a lot on denying that the universe had a beginning. Um, not for philosophical reasons, but it does seem that the science right now is pointing in that direction.
Yes, I agree. Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Eric, do you have any conclusion after all this we covered? Uh, Do you have any idea what to say to people who are interested in researching these topics and about thinking what the cause of the universe should be? So, anything to say?
I think it's interesting to think about. Craig's work obviously is worth considering. Myself, I feel like it is the beginning of the universe. What happened is super mysterious, and I don't. To me, it's hard to see how philosophically or empirically we're ever gonna be able to figure out exactly what happened. I think, I mean, who knows? But it seems to me like a deep mystery. And the the main argument I'm making is, Craig he thinks he can show a particular theistic hypothesis. I don't think that's right, and I think that just leaves us in a state of like, who knows? Who knows what happened uh, to start everything off? Um, and I also think that there are these remarks Craig makes that I think are actually super important in this context. I'm going to paraphrase. I don't have the exact quotations, but at some point, I think especially his late 70s book where he was first developing the Kalam argument, at some point he actually says something like, when I started thinking about the origin of the universe, all of the possibilities seem so bizarre that the most likely position is that there is no universe. But clearly there is. And this is actually a very important point. I agree with Craig on this that like the cosmic bomb thing is definitely weird and mysterious. The theistic thing is also definitely weird and mysterious. And Craig does in places acknowledge this. And I think his view is just all the options are bad, but the theistic one is the least weird or implausible one. And I just think that is an incorrect conclusion. And but that's something, especially if we're thinking of an abductive version of the argument, that's something that's really important to keep in mind. And by the way, another point that's been emphasized, and I think Craig himself acknowledges this to some extent, this notion of creation ex nihilo, even if you have a being that is creating out of nothing, that is very mysterious, like how that can work. And there's I think, a tendency to sort of brush past that with an appeal to omnipotence, but there's still something like very opaque about what is going on in this process. And in fact, I think Maimonides, I believe, actually argued that like this is so weird it couldn't happen. Like God could not create ex nihilo because it's so incomprehensible. So as we're considering these arguments, and Craig is trying to make the case of the theistic one being the most plausible one, let's not forget how mysterious and weird all of the options are, including the theistic one. So we're left with a mystery. That's my take.
Yes, that seems right to me because Michael Humer said to me, like, if we see our past in science, we can see that we thought that there were two options, and then we discover something third that we even didn't think about. So maybe there is something that we don't know about this. So yeah, it's fair to consider.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dr. Wielenberg, thank you so much, and thank you again for such a thoughtful and rigorous conversation. To everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the NT podcast, and let us know your thoughts in the comment, especially on the second stage of the Kalam argument and the nature of the first cause. Until next time, take care and keep thinking deeply. Goodbye.